Right. Good morning. Morning, good morning. Right. Happy Monday. Happy post Thanksgiving. I hope that you guys had a wonderful holiday. If you are here in the United States and you celebrate Thanksgiving, I ended up actually taking a little bit of a quiet Thanksgiving. My husband and I went to Utah and enjoyed the outdoors for a few days, and I was very far away from screens, very far away from the charts, and that was a much needed rest for me. And I hope if you guys have been working hard this year that you kind of took an opportunity to take a little bit of a rest as well. And so, with all of that being said, and the simple fact that I have not looked at charts since Tuesday of last week, I did not look at how we did on Wednesday. Thursday, of course, the market was closed, nor did I see how we did on Friday. So, before we actually go into looking at levels for today, one of the things I do really want to look at is just like an hourly chart or a 4 hour chart to see what we even did on the days that I particularly missed. And so you guys can see that the last day that we ended up playing was actually, I believe this was Tuesday, and we ended up having a pretty decent float day on Tuesday, actually. But then, so here was the 26th, which I believe, let me go back and actually look at the calendar, see what kind of days we had here. So the 26th was that Wednesday that we ended up missing. So this day here was the Tuesday we ended up trading. We had a lot of consolidation within market open, and I believe with the team, we ended up taking one loss and one win. We actually had a lot of our time frames end up revising below pivot when we initially marked this zone here. And so once we got back above pivot, our levels ended up revising pretty high to the upside. So we ended up ignoring that initial zone that we did mark on that morning on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, this actually doesn't really surprise me too much. It looks like we had a pretty decent float day. Um, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of probably mechanical trading that goes on, and I think we just had a lot of float on on the bid side. And so, if anyone traded on Wednesday, I'd be super curious to know if you guys had any opportunity or saw any good trades on ES. But I'm not super sad that I missed anything because the morning looked to be a pretty decent amount of consolidation. And then we had a little bit of a shoot up at around lunchtime, and then a lot of consolidation after that big move. And then this is what we had on the 28th of a really short day of trading, not too much movement, a little bit of float up. So, actually, while I was gone, we had a pretty decent amount of bullish action, which is good to see. And honestly, the market moved pretty well. It didn't stay in a really tiny range. We did end up hitting hitting it pretty high. One thing I do want to go look at, and let's go look at ES because MES I'm always marking up. My ES chart is going to be a lot cleaner. I want to actually go look at the daily on the ES and see how close we actually are to all-time highs. Okay, so we're actually not too close, but we're also not too far. So our all-time highs are currently trading at 69.5375, and we're trading at 68.14. So we have about 120, 130 points to go. But I mean, that doesn't actually seem that far because last week in particular, the past like 6, 7 days, we have been bullish to the nines. One of the things I do want to notice too, though, is that obviously, last week our volume dropped off significantly. And if this doesn't tell the story of, why I don't trade during holidays, it's this right here, right? Look at that. Zero volume on that Thursday, barely any volume on that Friday, had a significantly lower volume even just the week of Thanksgiving. And so when Christmas comes around, you probably won't be seeing a lot of me as well. But despite having that lower volume, we did have quite a lot of bullish price action. So 130 points isn't actually that far away for all-time highs. But that's just one thing I do like doing when I am gone for an extended period of time is I just want to go look at the days that I did not trade to make sure I'm still very, very familiar with ES and understand exactly where it's trading and what's going on. Oh no, this does this whenever I zoom in and out of my charts. Okay, so we're back in action here. One thing I do want to look at real quick before we start looking at our levels is see if ES has mechanically been trading well since ETH. And so it actually has. We opened the day perfectly within yellow box. We had think a slight attempt of maybe trying to go bullish on the day, but at a pretty quick and definitive break below yellow box. We actually didn't even get an opportunity to retest on the 15 minute. Had a really, really quick yellow box win, looks like pretty close to market open, and have just continued to be pretty bearish all the way down. We never even had another retest up to the bottom of our average range. So price has been moving pretty quickly. We have about a, what is that, 62-point range on the morning so far. So we might actually have some pretty good movement today. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of levels we have on fractals. So let's go get into that. We are currently trading at 68.13 right now. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, so our wave one daily is bullish, as we would assume, especially looking at the past couple days, on how well that we moved with a lot of those like low volume float days. But that vector is currently at 68.1375. We have this open state that we created at 68.64, which guess what? That was pretty much the high of day. I believe as of ETH, let's go check that real quick, see if I'm right. 68.64. It is. So that wave one daily is showing that high of day from what we made right at market open essentially. Let's go back into fractals. And we are currently trading at around that 68.1375, which is that vector. So again, as always, guys, right, we ignore the open state that we're creating on our current wave, because it's just the current, like the most recent high of day. So I'm not going to put any weight on this. If we do get up to 68.64 and a half, we're not going to be using this as a resistive area. One of the things that is interesting to the upside, we're so overextended on ES. Are you guys noticing this, right? We're trading at the 10% odds. We've blown past all these other odds. We don't actually have a lot of resistance up here. We also don't have a lot of resistance to the downside. So we have a decent amount of space here, I would say. One of the things that's really interesting is we had a gap up between um, the 24th and the first tier. So we have this 6759 data set down here that's technically an open state under this, which is really, really bizarre to see that gap and not see that open state get filled. I'd be very curious if we get down to this 6759, if we actually end up seeing that as support. We do have some clusters aligned with it, so 67, 59, 73 is a pretty interesting area. If we are bearish on our lower time frames, I'm really going to be looking at this to see if that 59.73 has other confluences on some of our smaller time frames and see if this open state actually ends up being supportive. So 59.73 is something interesting to the downside. And then to the upside are 5% odds. We have 69.18.23. So that feels pretty far away. 67.59 also feels pretty far away, but again, right, the wave one daily, we don't really have too much opportunity. Um, we get lucky sometimes where we get close to open states, but it's not like we hit open states on the wave one daily all the time. The big moral of the story that I wanted to tell on this one though is that we're extended on the wave one daily. So correction I think is due. The one thing I do want to remind you guys though, right? Just because we're overextended on the wave one daily doesn't necessarily mean that when we have a correction, it's going to be some massive, 200, 300, 400 point drop. It just necessarily means we may have a bearish day. And so even today, right, depending on if we close with this bearish, momentum, we could potentially get ourselves back below pivot on the wave one daily. So just because we're overextended doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see a massive revision, but a revision is due. Especially here, right? We're kind of on our third, getting close to our fourth daily H that we make on the wave one daily. The odds are getting a lot smaller as we get further and further on in that. So wave one daily is overextended. That's the moral of the story there. Let's go look at our 7 wave 60. Okay, so this chart is a little bit cleaner here. 68.15.88 is that current vector. So the 7 wave 60 is currently trading below vector. Uh, mm, One of the things I do want to notice is that between the 28th and what we've been seeing in pre-market from the 30th in the afternoon all the way into December 1st is how our vector has been acting. So we had this really, really strong push down, never actually got an opportunity to test vector on the 7 wave 60 to even inform an entry if we were looking at our larger time frames. Now, the one thing I do want to show is that we kind of disrespected Vector a little bit when we did have this push up here. When was this? At around 2 a.m. last night. We ended up seeing Vector be actually a little bit supportive at this point when we were seeing this shift. We shot above Vector very briefly and then had another strong push down. I don't know about you guys. I don't think I would see this as like a very respected Vector. We did see this really great trend on the 7 wave 60, but we didn't really see the 7 wave 60 get respected too much when we did test Vector. Now, on this break below and on this candle at, let's see, 8 a.m., so this was probably about an hour ago, maybe 30 minutes ago, we did end up testing Vector on continuing to see that rejection. So this is kind of the first, maybe second candle of the night that we've seen kind of respect Vector. I'm going to keep watching the 7 wave 60 to see if Vector does get respected further. Really want to see if Vector gets respected on some of our smaller time frames as well, because we did have good movement. Just want to see if Vector is going to be the play for us today. One of the other things I just want to show is that because we are below pivot, is obviously we have our open state here. It's a little bit hard to see, right? But it's at 6804.97. I'm ignoring it, right? Because it's the vector that we've made on this current short wave. We do have another one all the way down here at 6774.43. That seems really far away. But interestingly enough, that does align with that one open state we had on on our wave one daily. So very pretty far away. Actually, I don't think it actually is. Let me look. Wave one daily. 6774. Yeah, no, 6759. That's actually pretty close to each other when you're looking at such a macro scale. That's pretty interesting. So we do have something at 6774. It doesn't make the 7 wave 60 super overextended, but I do kind of like it for maybe a potential bounce area. We do also have something down at 6762. So we're seeing some pretty good opportunity, I would say, on some of our more macro timeframes. Let's see if our lower timeframes have anything similar to this too, because 74 to 62, that's actually not that far away from where we're currently trading. So, um, of course, we're not really going to be paying too much attention to the upside because remember, as we go back above pivot, we're going to see all of these open states revise. And then, of course, as we go back below pivot, we're going to see open states revise as well. But because we're pretty ambivalent, I would say right now in the 7 wave 60, by going bullish or bearish, we'll really want to watch if we end up marking a gray box at 74 or 62. If we do go above pivot briefly and then back below, really going to be wanting to watch to see if these revise. Okay, to the 20 wave. Okay, so we're bearish on the 20 wave again, trading below pivot. And I would say that Vector is probably getting respected a little bit more in the 20 wave. We had a little bit of consolidation here, saw a little bit of support when we were making that long wave. We had barely had a tap of Vector here as we're continuing to see bearish action on the 20 wave 15. We're seeing 67.73.36 as a double bottom from the previous long wave. I do really like this 67.63 because look at how old that open state is. It's 422 periods old. That would put us extremely overextended on the 20 wave 15 minute. Do we hit the 2% odds frequently on the 20 wave 15 minute? Honestly, not really. But if we could get down at 63.60, that would be a really high probability bounce point if we have a lot of strong bearish momentum to the downside. I do think the 73 to 75 area is a good place to test. And then the 63 area would probably be another good place. So far, we're having actually two pretty good gray box areas that we could look to. Of course, right, we have this one here at 6805. We're ignoring that because that is the open state we have created in this current wave on the 20 wave. Let's look at the 10 wave, see if we have something that's maybe a little bit closer, even though those aren't really that far away. Um, let's see. So 10 wave, we're continuing. Holy crap. Continuing to be bearish. 10 wave's pretty similar story. Vector's been pretty well respected, I would say, so far. Looks pretty good actually. Um, we have this 804.99 open state that we're going to ignore. We're seeing here that we have 67.70 is where this current double bottom is from our previous short wave. So far that 70 to 75 area does look pretty good for a potential gray box area. I do really like that so far, actually. Of course, again, right? If we get ourselves above pivot and then shift ourselves back below, we're gonna have to look at our open states again because those values are gonna refresh, but we will see. So far, 67, 70 to 75 looks like a really good bounce area. So let's go look at our 7 wave 5 minute. Okay, so look at us, we just revised back below pivot on the 7 wave 5 minute. We were bearish. Looks like this is our very first candle back again below pivot. and currently trading below vector. We do have a double bottom down here at 68.01, which, as we know, right, that was the low that we kind of made a couple hours ago. And then we do have our 20% odds at 67.99. We do have our 2% odds on the 7-way 5 at 67.97, more or less. You can look, right? This rarely happens, but we do see our 1% at 67.74. So again, if our 7-way 5-minute gets really overextended, that 70 to 74 area does look very, very good for a high probability bounce. Now we do have a little bit more data right on the 7-way 5 on these really small time frames for potential at 67.99, which, I don't know how much I trust that, especially because we didn't see any zones like that on any of our larger time frames. But if you are looking for scalps, there's potential support there. And then, of course, this 68.14 to 18 area so far is looking decent for resistance. The only reason I'm not going to say we need to take a vector play immediately is just because our larger time frames didn't really play vector super well. You can see on the 7-way 5-minute, vector is actually playing pretty well throughout the night, which is good to see. So there could be potential scalp opportunity on the 7-way 5-minute vector throughout the morning. But so far, I really, really like this 67.74. It feels really far away, but we pretty much have confluence across every single time frame. Look at that even. 50 wave 1, 67.73, confluence there. We're definitely going to be marking this zone. The only thing I want to say on the 50 wave 1 is this is the only time frame, of course, besides the wave 1 daily that is above our pivot right now. And we're seeing 68.12 as a supportive vector. Again, not trusting it too much, right? Because ever since we did start creating this long wave, we've barely once tested vector as we've been up here. But what I want to say with that, right, is if we do revise ourselves back below pivot on the 50 wave 1 minute, it's very possible that this 67.73 number could revise. Does that concern me? Not too much. What I want to be looking for, though, is if we do have a bullish wave start on some of our mid to larger time frames, and then we end up revising back below, I do want to be checking just to make sure that 70 to 74 area does stay consistent. So let's go mark that. And just knowing for the fact that it is still, what is that? 70 to 74. It's still kind of far away. It's not crazy far away. We're to actually still be well within um, our max range, which is good to see. So let's do 70 to 74. That's what I'm going to do because we have a lot. I'm going to do 75. We have a lot of confluence in this area here. Let me make that gray. Make one little yellow box gray. Okay. So let's just go back real quick. So we have stuff on 50 wait 1 minute, 2% odds. We have the open state on the 7-wave 60 at 74.40. We have the 1% odds in an open state on the 7-wave 5. We have 73 open state on the 20-wave 15. And we have the 70.5 on the 10-wave 15. So 70.5 is kind of our last line of defense for that whole zone. So that's actually really good. Because we have so many open states and low percentage odds, I'm just going to say OS and low percentage odds I'm going to say across all time frames. I'm going to just say, obviously excluding the wave 1 daily because we technically did not have one there. But across all of our daily time frames, that is what we had, which is pretty impressive, honestly. So what I'm going to do though, as we open and as we kind of move, because this zone is a little bit far away, if we have any sort of bullish movement that shifts us into bullish waves, and then we get ourselves back below, really, really going to be checking to see if we get revised numbers down here from this 69 to 71 area. I do really like it because there's so much density, and I'm imagining that if we do have a shift, everyone's probably going to shift in a relatively consistent way. But with how bearish we've been today, there's really nothing stopping us from going any lower. There's also nothing stopping us from going higher. From a yellow box perspective, we have a lot of room down until we actually get to our max range. So I'm not super worried about this being like so overextended from like to form potentially an outlier day. especially because we had good movement during the holiday. We had a lot of float to the upside, and the wave one daily is so overextended that we should be looking for some type of a correction on the wave one daily to potentially start a bearish cycle and give us a little bit of a fresh bullish cycle if we do want to kind of come back up there. So that's it, guys. This is a really, really clean level. And I'm really, really happy to see that because I think for the past couple days, especially as we were approaching the holiday, we kind of struggled to find levels. Like fractals weren't looking super clean for us. We weren't finding super dense levels. So this is a really, really nice, refreshing thing to see on a fine Monday morning. The other thing I want to say is happy December 1st. I think you guys should be taking some opportunities to go back to November and go check your performance, see how you traded in November particularly, and really use that as some time to reflect on, how your November profit looked, if you traded well, if you followed your rules, to make sure you can really start off this month fresh. This is the last month of the year, so do please remember to stay focused on your goals. Um, do not try to rush any sort of trading. Do not try to make poor decisions because we're this close to the end of the year and you have some frivolous profit target you need to make before we hit the year end. So, new month, new opportunities, new ways to get better in our trading. All right, guys, I'm going to go grab some breakfast. I do really like this 70 to 75 area. We're going to keep watching it, of course, as New York session opens. But otherwise, everybody trade safe. And if you guys are in Ascend Premium, I will be trading live with you guys this morning in that trading chat. All right, guys, have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.